games like Bully, for example, or Manhunt?
Well, I think that they haven't got a Collection 2 yet, because Max Payne 3 is still getting new DLC. So I think they will probably wait with that until they can actually make Complete Edition, and they will probably bundle it with GTA 4 then. But what would be the next game?
The timing is the best, though, because
yeah,
well, you know, I think that would be okay. But as you know, coming back to financial black hole that Take-Two have between now and sort of March, you know, that's something they'd have to push out pretty quickly for it to get their numbers up.
Mhm. Yeah. So what I'm trying to think of what was in
how that goes.
So that was episodes from Liberty City, Red Dead Redemption, LA Noire, Midnight Club, Los Angeles.
Midnight Club.
And it was called Edition 1 or something like that. So, I don't know. What are they going to put in Edition 2? I have no freaking clue.
Well, there are only two games remaining, actually, so they will have to do, like...
having said that, if it is successful, it may galvanise them into doing the HD things, because I know I've spoken with Gtamen at length before that, you know, certainly when it came to like the Grand Theft Auto 3 10th anniversary stuff, you know, it was a strange decision by Rockstar to sort of go through the HD process, put sort of mini achievements in it, and then release it on those platforms. Now, I'm not saying those platforms aren't great for gaming, but essentially GTA built its name on PlayStation platforms and PC. And so for them not to sort of go then about sort of releasing GTA 3 as a HD version on console, which, you know, if they've gone through the process of doing that on iPhone, etc., iPad and so on, I can't see there being too many technical issues with porting it across to something like PSN or Steam or XBLA or something like that. So if that collection does sell well, I do hope it does galvanise people into sort of pestering Rockstar's community forums to get not just GTA 3 and potentially Vice City, but, you know, a lot of people since HD collections started have been crying out for games like San Andreas and Bully and Manhunt to make that step up to HD, because, you know, coming from the PS2 era, those were games that did define a generation to a certain degree, and I think with a HD remake and a re-release of those particular titles, I think, you know, that's going to appeal to a wider audience and you know, potentially drive Rockstar even higher than it is now.
Yeah, because the weird thing is, on Steam, GTA 3 has actually an upgraded version, where normally in a PS2 version you get DMA design, but now it just says Rockstar North. So they have been working on GTA 3, and like you said, why don't they release the HD version? But then again, maybe you're waiting until GTA San Andreas turns 10 and then release the trilogy. Wouldn't make very much sense, because probably by that time we'll already have the next change of consoles, because that's going to take like 2 years. But you never know.
Maybe that's what Edition 2 is. I don't know. Yeah, well, I forgot about Bully. That was a good game. I don't know if you played that, Gtamen, but going back.
Well, I bought my PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 for one game, and it wasn't Saints Row. So...
Well, if you haven't got a copy of Bully, mate, you definitely have to check it out. I mean, Bully was extremely controversial, but at the same time, I could kind of see the point of why they made a game like that.
It's Rockstar.
Yeah, I don't think they're worried about controversial.
No, I remember certain lawsuits for about a couple of years long with a certain guy called Gtamen or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
Now it's that bad that he cannot even come near any Rockstar employee. And yes, Squirrel, hot coffee mod. I remember it like the day it was yesterday. It was actually a Dutch guy that did the mod from a GTA forum. It was actually pretty cool. Some guy just made a mod. It was really simple. You just had to turn, instead of the mod on to, no, from off to on. It was actually in the magazine I wrote. Pretty damn beautiful.
So I just want to point out for those who don't know who Jack Thompson is, he was an American lawyer, I believe, and he basically went after all the major video games publishers because of violent conduct. He basically wanted to see any sort of violence taken out of all video games, full stop. The biggest case that he came across was obviously the whole campaign against Rockstar and the GTA franchise, and really sort of was a thorn in Rockstar's side for so long because they chose to fight the case, and as a result, that cost them, we're not talking tens of millions, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to try and fight that. As it turns out now, I believe Jack Thompson lost a case in California where he tried to push through a bill to get that removed. As a result of that, he obviously had to step away from it, and I believe as of now he's actually lost his license to practice law.
Yeah, he's disbarred.
Yay!
So common sense really won out there, to be honest, at the end of the day, because while I can understand people's views that, in terms of controversy, at the end of the day, for gaming to be a grown-up thing, it needs to address taboo issues, it needs to be controversial, because if it isn't, then people won't have those discussions about those very topics. Heavy Rain probably did a good job of bringing very real adult topics to the gaming industry, and forget all your zombie mashers and first person shooters. There are some very real issues that that go on in social circles and around the world that people are willing to discuss in private, but not so much in public when it warrants a public discussion. And video games is a great medium for sort of bringing them to the public eye, getting them noticed, and getting discussions around them.
Well, the reality too, he was into frivolous lawsuits, and one of the things that happened with that when he first reared his head was it generated a lot of interest in, like in the U.S. there was some political push and stuff around those times. You even had the Hillary Clintons of the world stepping forward saying video games were bad and all this. And what you can take away from that is, there was a realization that, for one, video games have a much broader support than people realize. It's not kids playing video games, it's adults playing video games. That's the first thing. People all the way up to my age, into their 40s now. We pioneered video games. We started playing them when they first were out, and we're still playing them. And you might have a lot of kids on Call of Duty on the multiplayer, but what we're really talking about here is, not anything that's anything, very different at all from Hollywood and what kids are seeing in movies. Whereas, you've got a movie where it's got sex and it's got violence and kids go and watch those all the time, and it's more realistic because it's an image of humans having their head split open or whatever, versus a video game where like Call of Duty violence, it's a cartoon almost. So whatever politicians have to say about it, they realized very quick they didn't have a lot of support worldwide for pushing against that stuff. You have more effect with.
I just need to stop you there for a second. Have we gone offline with the podcast?
I don't know. Have we?
Twitch TV saying we're currently offline at the moment.
Well, I'm showing we're still recording locally and broadcasting. So.
Okay. I just wanted to double check that.
Probably going to get a two-parter. It'll happen. Nick, are you still there?
Yep.
Of course, we've gone into hour and 15 minutes or so range. But I think that I think that when we're talking about video games and we're talking about video game violence, you're not going to see any more on that front. I think the war has been waged, and I think the politicians and stuff lost in that regard. I started to say that more what you got to worry about is these consumer groups that picket the Walmarts and stuff that prevent them from selling it, because I think they will respond with pulling those things from their stores, and I think that's a little bit of a risk. But I think overall, I don't think Rockstar's got anything to worry about going forward.
No,
controversy or not.
The whole stuff with all the violence in video games, like for example, someone shoots everyone in the school, and then immediately everyone points the fingers at like Call of Duty and GTA. I mean, just because it's a game and you can play it and you're a guy that's not really 100% in his head, it doesn't really mean that every gamer is immediately a possible murderer. Everyone is a possible murderer. It sounds weird, but let's just not go into too much detail with that, because I kind of am a guy that has a lively opinion about stuff. So
no, I think you're absolutely right with that, GTA, and I think what crops up, and it certainly was apparent with the tragic case that happened in Norway, where that guy went on a rampage, blew up a government building, and then sailed to an island and shot a lot of people. There was that, it came out that the guy had apparently used Call of Duty as a training tool, and had played a lot of World of Warcraft to sort of give the impression that he was just an average, ordinary person. And there is that danger that a lot of groups, as Kryptonite said there, will jump on that. But at the same time, I think, looking at the psychology of convicted criminals who've gone out and done things like this, the problems were there way before they ever picked up that control pad, and they'll still be there long after they've dropped that control pad. I just think it's too easy to blame one medium, because at the end of the day, to a certain degree, games are slightly different from movies in the fact that during a movie you're sort of subjected to an hour and a half, 2 hours in certain horror movies of non-stop violence. With a particular game, in particular with a game, for example, if it becomes too much, you can just put down that controller, switch it off. And I think there's a big difference between that there is, whenever you play a game, no matter how immersed, you're always aware you can switch that off. And I think with movies and certainly TV shows, it's not always the case.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, movies. Let's just say I've never watched Saw, but I think it's a very good example, because there are some pretty fucked up movies out there. Excuse my language, and people don't complain about that. I mean,
that's just
if
it.
If you have a game like Prototype, very violent, chopping arms off and stuff, and you have a movie about that, if it's a movie, oh, nothing, it's a good movie, everyone loves it. But when it's Prototype, violent video games, stop it. I mean, come on, man.
Well, they equate it with kids.
It tends to be over the top, though. It's not. I think certainly a lot, as you mentioned in the example there with Prototype, if you hammer your fist into the ground and a million spikes pop up and impale people, that's not something you would ever see in a violent movie. So therefore, because of the over the top of the nature, there is a tendency to sort of have a bit of a laugh with it, and sort of dismiss it for what it is, that is purely fictional. You ain't ever going to see that anywhere else. But if someone just takes a basic, in a movie, for example, if someone takes a basic utensil like a knife or something and does some interestingly killing techniques with it, I think, because there's a lack of an over-the-topness of it, it's relatable, and that's kind of a bit disturbing, more so than perhaps shooting several people in a Call of Duty game, for example, with a rocket launcher or something like that, because you're just not going to do that on a day-to-day basis. But if you're talking about a horror movie where a lot of the stuff to actually do the violent acts is actually very real, very accessible stuff,
yeah,
you know, there isn't that distinguishment between reality and fiction.
Well, I think the biggest thing that's the realization that's very there and apparent is you take someone who say, oh well, they used to play this violent video game, and I guess the biggest thing when anytime something that comes up is the first thing you should ask is, okay, well, what violent movies did they watch? Let's go into his DVD collection and put that out there.
Yeah.
You know, I'm one of those people, you know, from all my years and stuff experiencing, you know, troubled teens and things like that because I used to work with them quite a lot. You know, there's one thing that's real apparent. Video games have absolutely zero effect on a kid's mental state. In fact, I would say when people play video games, when kids play video games, you're more likely to find a kid that's involved with other kids and he's got friends and he's more adjusted. Even if they're sitting there saying, "Oh, well, cool, look at the gore and all that other stuff," it's just an interesting footnote. It's not, "Oh, well, this makes me want to go, you know, shoot an RPG in the street." You know, it's absolutely a ridiculous jump. And
I think going forward, though, in respect of that, my concern would not be so much the games themselves. It's the online infrastructure and etiquette around online multiplayer that would worry me slightly more, because we've seen it now already where you know, we find a lot of kids playing, for example, Call of Duty, you know, shouting obscenities at people.
Yeah,
and
that's
there's
definitely
quite a lot
true.
of videos on YouTube where parents will sort of video kids bad-mouthing other people. And whereas in the past, you know, video games hasn't presented a problem because it's more of escape from problems as opposed to creating the problem. I think with the newer generation, I do wonder if it's not so, as I say, not so much the games themselves, but the constant online digital world, if you like, that could potentially cause a lot of the problems that we haven't seen in the past, if that makes sense.
Yes, but you know, with that, I think a bigger challenge is the social media. I think there's more of a risk there for kids. Like, you just recently had a Canadian teen that did a YouTube video about how she was harassed and bullied through social media and YouTube, Facebook, and then she proceeded to kill herself after doing her YouTube video that she put up. That's more, to me, that's more of a challenge going forward with kids, because a lot of that stuff that kids do with that lingers. Like, you know, you create a profile and your friends are linked to you, and then they start teasing you on there, and then it's like it's a permanent record that goes forward. You know, even to the point where, you know, now job candidates and stuff, their Facebook history and stuff is searched a little bit to see what kind of person they are. And that's more of a challenge than the online multiplayer.
People have to take on board, because as we push social games out and the ways that different online features connect, I'd be conscious that the games industry need to sort of start thinking about that a little bit more now than perhaps they've done in the past, because, as I say, while it's not so much the game's content, but if they're starting to push into social features, social media, as you say, social media is already starting to show signs of that becoming a very real, apparent problem. And the last thing, you know, the games industry wants more than anything is having to then deal with that as both social media and gaming merge towards each other more and more.
Yeah. Every time Dante earns a trophy, his Twitter feed goes with 10 posts. So I'm against social media. I mean, gaming should be gaming. That you have a PlayStation Network or an Xbox Live or a Steam, that's alright. I mean, share everything you want. But like a Facebook and a Twitter, I mean, that should be separate of the gaming itself. Sure, if you are like the kind of guy like me that I get a platinum, I say, hey, look at me, I got a platinum. Well, that's fine. But don't, like, for example, a good example was the Microsoft press conference at the E3. why so many social media features? It's about gaming. There are gamers that want games, not your Connect and your Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of stuff.
You sound like me. I'm kind of against that stuff, but I tell you, it's such a big thing everywhere.
The point is that it's so huge now. No matter how much you try and avoid it, there's no way you can get away from it. It's how you deal and use it that sort of counts, because even though at first you may not necessarily want it in your game, or vice versa, you don't want games on your social side of things, they are going to merge. It's inevitable. As I say, you see it now. You pointed out the sort of example there where, if I get a trophy, it posts it to Twitter, that's then posts it to Facebook and so on. And that, at some point it's going to be a case of where I won't even need to do that by syncing my trophies. It will just happen automatically from in-game. Steam does a similar sort of thing like that now, where you can post your Steam's progress and so on. So it'll be interesting to see it forward. But as I say, the games industry is definitely someone, although a majority of gamers may consider it kind of a non-issue, it's something that the games industry do sort of need to cotton on to and sort of try and come up with a solution before the problem becomes very real and apparent, as it has done with that particular case of that Canadian girl.
Yeah, about that. Don't take me wrong on this, but that stuff happens every day, and just because she got known on the internet, it's a big issue. I mean, not to be sounding like some mean guy or anything, but
if it's going to sound mean, don't say it.
No, but it's very sad and all that stuff. But I mean, when it comes to Facebook, it spreads around and it spreads around, and everyone makes such a big deal out of it. I mean, all right, it's sad, but it's going to be going on and on for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, don't. I mean, it's sad, but whole YouTube is full of videos with poor girl, poor girl. I mean, stop it. It happens every day. Are you going to make a whole channel about poor girl committed suicide?
Well, I think more
does it.
GTA, man. What you've got to take into account, though, right, is that obviously it's quite something that's happened pretty soon, recently, but also the fact that it is important that people do continuously discuss that issue, because if it doesn't, it gets left behind, and then unfortunately someone else comes along and it happens again. The mistakes of how it happened in the first place haven't been learned.
And this points to, like, here, I'm a parent, so here's my take on it. You talk about video games, and I'm a common sense person. I don't believe it makes a person violent. I'll say that again. However, when we're talking about social media, it's one of those things that it is almost unregulated because it's so open to what the kids that are on Facebook put into it. So in that sense, I think it's one of those things. It's a red flag for parents, and I think it is important to, I'll let my kids play the most violent video games you've ever seen. At the same time, I will mute when they're playing multiplayer in Call of Duty. My reason being is which one's more of a threat to them, in my mind, is some adult or other kid out there with serious issues and harassing them and doing those things, and they get that stuff. They get that stuff over PSN, and they get nasty messages from people. I myself have gotten them, and as an adult, you realize that social media has more effect on kids because it is their friends that are on there. It is their people that they're going to be going to school with the next day, and that's a lot different of an effect than playing cartoon violence or playing something that you're in GTA and you're on a roof with an RPG. I don't think my kids are going to take up going to the roof with an RPG, but certainly if something happens on Facebook and a whole bunch of kids are doing something that extends into school and into everything that they do, I want to know about it, and I want to be there to make sure it doesn't lead to something very serious or even a fight or trouble, discipline in school. And so I take it more serious from that standpoint as a parent concerned about my children. I'm more worried about Facebook and its effect than I would be about video games. So take that how you will. But
before, you know, essentially coming back to the violent video games thing is that you know, people will have these problems before they pick up a violent video game, and they will have them after. And you know, with social media, it's not too dissimilar in the fact that people will have problems before they sign up for Facebook, Twitters, etc. And you know, even if they close their accounts, those problems are still going to be ongoing. Unfortunately, with social media and certainly with gaming side of things, you know, there's no, as you pointed out there, Kryptonite Dragon, there's no regulatory body, there's no way to sort of screen those people that have those problems. Yeah. And as those two sort of industries come together, you know, it is going to be something that's more prominent. So, you know, I can see why people would say, oh, well, we don't have to go on about it like Gtamen just pointed out. But at the same time, I think, you know, if we don't go on about it more often and discuss those sorts of issues, then, you know, we're talking about something that's going to develop into an even bigger problem as technology and social media and games all move on together. You know, we're going to be facing the same problem when perhaps maybe now we've got the opportunity to try and do something about it and solve that problem going forward, as opposed to going forward and then trying to address it at that point, and when we could have done it beforehand. So I don't know, it's just it's a complicated issue as such. But yeah, I just think it's a tragic event there. I just want to say while we're on the podcast, if any of that young girl's friends or whatever are listening to the podcast as well, we'd like to extend our sympathies to your family.
Yeah, it's very sad and stuff, and it does need attention because it is an issue, internet bullying and shit. But in my opinion, internet bullying is actually the most easiest bullying to avoid. Because online gaming, you can mute people, you can leave the game. On Facebook, of course, on Facebook it's a little harder, but you can still like block people and stuff. Of
well,
course,
the underlying thing there is
bullying,
once
it's
you
harder. I myself have been bullied, so I know how it is. But it made me think about how people treat each other and shit. Like, why do you bully someone? What's the fun about it and all that stuff? I mean,
well, like one of the things about Facebook, you can tell where a person lives. There's a lot of things. Even if they don't list that information, you can look and see where all their friends that they have friended on Facebook live, and give you a general idea. You could find someone very easily. That's one of the first problems with it. Secondly, you know, it's not something that you can turn off and then just like erase it. Even if you're blocking someone or you've done all that, the damage could be done, and a person can make a new account and log back in and find you. And you know, that's really the challenge that's there for kids. Is, you know, there's not a lot of privacy and stuff, even if it's touted with, you know, all the blocks and having your parents look over your shoulder.
That is doing IT right now, I know that there are a lot of ways around all that stuff, but as just a 12-year-old that enjoys talking to his friends on Facebook, it's really not anything to say to a girl of 12 years old saying, hey, if you do this and this and this, you will have an IP address from China, so they won't know you're living in the US. I mean, it's very easy to just make a new account calling yourself Tommy Vercetti and start bullying everyone with GTA 5 City quotes. But there is on Facebook and Twitter, there's just no other way. I myself also have something recent that some guys call terrorist gamers. If you're listening, you know what I'm going to do with you if I meet you. But, of course, being the guy I am, I was the guy that made videos about it, put them on YouTube, and just say, look, these guys are pretty damn sad. so here are their profiles with 0 trophies. I still think there was one guy making new accounts over and over and over again. But I had some fun, but it got annoying. So thankfully, thank you Sony for making the feature of disabling messages from other people. But
I just want to round off this. I just want to round off this topic. What Gtamen's solution is actually a very good one if you do happen to have a PBR. I do think, if someone is actively doing that to you on a gaming network, personally, I'd have no qualms about naming and shaming those people. If someone is sending you nasty messages, you can go through all the tools of blocking it, but at the same time, naming and shaming hurts more. So, I'm all for that. There was I'm sort of aware that we're sort of getting on to the 2-hour mark, but there was one thing that I sort of wanted to cover, Kryptonite Dragon, that someone did point out in the comment section, which perhaps we of the news team haven't really covered so much this week, and that's about DLC on disc.
Okay.
I just wanted to know what sort of your guys' thoughts on it, and then I'll sort of chime in with mine, really.
Well, as I mentioned before, like anything with DLC, it's almost digital downloads are going to be the most common way to get DLC. But my take on it is I'm patient enough that I will wait for Game of the Year in most cases, and I actually don't like the way Call of Duty has sold their DLC, where you pay for a subscription and then get it as it comes out. So I don't know. I think there's some good and bad with it, with DLC being on disc, but then at the same time, if you have more control over the way you want to take it in, I think that's more important for me.
But I guess the question comes down to this, is that as a consumer, sort of looking at it, it's kind of like, if a game in this particular example, as someone mentioned, was Resident Evil 6,
Mm-hmm.
If you go and purchase that game for $60, okay, there's going to be DLC releasing at some point, but then if a month later or even on day one you're asked to then pay another $10 for DLC, which on first glance you wouldn't necessarily think twice about. You'd think, well, I'm a fan of the franchise, I'm going to get that DLC, it's a great game. But then to find out that you've paid $10 for the game on top of your purchase price on day one,
yeah.
You see what I mean?
I guess I'm a little bit numb to that, because that's happening everywhere, and really it's an attempt by the gaming community to they're milking every cent out of things, because it's map packs, it's things like that.
Yeah.
And if it's paramount to the story, you think it would be included initially anyway. I would say the only thing that really
that we've seen that prominently happen with recently is obviously Capcom, and I just wanted to point out, obviously I brought up Resident Evil 6 there, but this isn't actually the first time it's happened with Capcom games.
Yeah.
In fact, it was pointed out in news over numerous sites this week as well, that there were some issues with the Street Fighter Tekken side of stuff as well, in the fact that DLC from a pre-order bonus had ended up on another platform, even though they weren't going to be unlocked. And so to me, that what that highlights, and the reason I say about bringing the issue up and the thoughts on it, is that there are some companies out there that do good DLC. Admittedly, Bethesda, although they have issues with programming, do some great DLC packages. To support their games after release, and Rockstar, as we mentioned before, is certainly one of them as well.
Yes.
But it seems strange that companies like Capcom seem to be having a real problem with it so much that they have to put that on the disc. I do wonder if that whether or not that's a a PSN issue or an XBLA issue or something like that. It's interesting to think about. I mean, what do you think about it, Nick?
Well, think about it. Pretty much every game has DLC on it, pre-order bonuses. I mean, for me, it really depends on what's on the disc. If it's like a really huge pack of DLC, I'm like, maybe they did it because they didn't want to have you to download a big thing from the store, a big patch or anything. But on the other hand, it's like, why? I mean, just let people decide whether they do or do not want to use their space on their PS3 or 360 or whatever for that specific piece of DLC.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-order bonuses, on the other hand, they're free and they're pretty small for like a gun or anything. But why do you keep on doing that stuff? Because you know you're going to get hated for it, and you're probably going to have to come with a solution of giving the DLC for free while you actually wanted to charge $10 for it.
Yeah, maybe it has something to do with the same, along the lines of like Skyrim, with having difficulty integrating it. Maybe it has something to do with running it off the disk, because there is an integration problem.
I'm watching that whole Skyrim issue with great interest because of the Bethesda issue. What I'm worried about with that is that Bethesda seemed to be able to, even though it was buggy versions, they were able to program Fallout 3 and all the DLC onto PS3. They were able to do that with Fallout New Vegas, and essentially those two games were using the same engine. Dishonored won't be so much of a problem because it is using a different engine made by Arcane Studios, but with Skyrim, that was using the Fallout engine, and I wonder if in the process of upgrading the engine for each game, they've done something wrong. And it does pose an interesting question for Bethesda in terms of, are they going to invest the money in building a brand new graphics engine for any games they work on after Skyrim, or are they really going to try and fix this issue and try and appease the fans? Because if they do invest in a brand new engine, it still doesn't resolve the problems with Skyrim, and essentially a lot of Skyrim fans that own the version PS3 version feel like basically Bethesda have given them the middle finger in response to the fact that they've said they're working on it, but there's no time frame, and also the way that Bethesda sort of PR have worded it, which is it may not come at all, doesn't fill their community of fans that bought it on PS3 with a lot of confidence going forward.
Well, there's one thing to recognize here.
I was just going to say, Kryptonite, if we round this... Sorry, I was just going to say, if we round this off at the 2-hour mark, make this week a 2-hour podcast, I've just asked the guys in chat if there's any questions they have for us before we round it up to a close. Modern Warfare 3 fan 1985 just asked us what our thoughts are on the slimmer PS3, if we think it's value for money or not.
No, I don't.
In a nutshell,
it's basically the PS1 version, but then a PS3. Because the first thing the website I'm working for said was like, "What is this? The PS1? Why not the good old-fashioned PS3 opening and injecting of discs and stuff? I mean, why? Just, of course, it looks ugly." That's my opinion. I still think that the PS3 Slim is the best looking one, but of course the 500 gigs is a good thing. But if you are smart, you just buy the 12 gig ones, and then just
put a 500 gigabyte drive in there.
Yeah, and then just
I was going to say, I've seen the Yakuza 5 special edition. posted up on the web because Yakuza 5 is due to launch soon, and they always do a new thing, and it just looks like it's got scout badges posted and pasted all over the machine, and it looks horrible. But not having had one in my hands, I couldn't say aesthetically whether or not it's something I'd want. But what boils down to whether or not the new super slim, sort of speak, is whether its value for money is certainly here in the UK, for example. We've got the 12 gig solid state version and the 500 gig, as opposed to everywhere else where it's 250 gig and 500 gig. I can see the value in the 500 gig one, but I can't see the value in the small one. 12 gig solid state would probably allow you to sort of install 2+ games on it a month, but you'd have to keep deleting and reinstalling the games. But on top of all that, the cost of the 12 gig solid state isn't worth it when you can still pick up 160 gigabyte slim for less than the cost. It doesn't warrant the value for money in that respect.
Yeah.
And so what I have to question with Sony is, I'm all for them releasing a solid, experimenting with solid state memory. I'm all for them releasing a slimmer PS3. But what I really don't like is saying to your consumer base, we're going to release a new slim line that costs us less to produce, it costs us less as a business, so therefore we can continue investing that money back in games, but at the same time we're not going to reduce the price, and it's going to cost you more for something that costs us less. And when you put that message across, it's not a very positive message as a business to put across.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'm sort of torn on it a little bit. I think if you haven't got a PS3 already, then it's a great entry point. Certainly for those looking to pick up a PS3 at this stage in the generation, and looking to purchase a service like Plus. But for those that already have it, I can't really see the attraction. And I do think as well that Sony may have been better off if they'd sort of focused more on maybe putting a PS3 stroke Vita combo together as well.
Yeah, it's almost like they were experimenting with trying to make something where it had less electrical problem or less things that could go wrong with it. That's the whole point of going to the solid state, where you don't have a moving drive and if you don't have the disc ejecting. But at the same time, it makes me wonder, do they realize when you step back like that and you start to go to something with like the lid, like I saw a demonstration of it and the lid kept popping open, and it was almost comical when it's like, if you're going on the cheap to try and make it more secure, make it more, what's the word I'm looking for, to make the PS3 so it's less likely to break down, then okay. But if you're doing that with the idea of being cheap about it, then it makes it very unattractive as a console.
Yeah, and
you're paying a couple $100 and you're going to save even 50, and you've got to put up with a door that's going to pop open, or it's a cheap plastic door that you close on it, and having a solid state drive versus where we're moving into an era of digital downloads and stuff, and you can get a 50 gigabyte drive for what, $50 to pop in there. It doesn't make very much sense. I don't know. I really don't think it has value. I don't think I would never buy one of those.
I don't know. I still think it has value for those that are coming in, but for those that are already there, I don't see the value for potentially owning a second console. But
if you want to put value in it, bring back backwards compatibility. I mean, something like that. I mean,
yeah.
Bring back backwards compatibility.
Yeah, that definitely drew a lot of people in. A lot more than perhaps a new revised PS3. But I just wanted to point out, and it's interesting as well, because I know Kryptonite, you wanted to cover this briefly, is obviously in the UK, PS3 sales have hit 5 million, which some people might consider as a bit slow, but I'll get into that in a second. It's weird that it's hit that benchmark, because it actually went, in terms of the official figures, this last sort of week and a half, it sort of hit that 5 million on the back of a sales spike because more people were buying the new Super Slim. So I do wonder if it will put people off or not. But yeah, we finally hit 5 million units in the UK, which is a great number. I think some people probably think that number's a bit slow getting there, in the fact that it's taken nearly 6 years. But at the same time, you know, you do have to put it in context. A lot of the marketing over here is Xbox based. You will find a lot of the TV adverts, even for multi-platform games like Call of Duty, all end with the Xbox logo. Even though that game is available on PS3, I often find as well with a lot of game shops that I go into, you know, the shelf space is smaller for PS3, and the staff generally do tend to push 360 more so than the other consoles. I know there was a big hoo-ha in the US, and it's a common conception that GameStop in the US employees tend to push 360 more than any other unit. So to hit 5 million is actually quite a nice milestone for them. It'll be interesting to see how they go forward with that.
How many Xboxes have been sold over there? I'm curious about that now because you know, I'm one of those people. I've had an argument with a GameStop employee over Xbox PS3, and it started from nothing more than I had a woman talking to me while I was looking at games and asking me about versions and what was better for her son, and I was basically talking to her about exclusives, and I was mentioning both consoles when this guy from GameStop just interrupted and basically said, look, the Xbox is everything and the PS3 is crap. And it went from, you know, me giving an honest opinion that both of them are great consoles and have, you know, their own value, to me basically taking offense to the fact that this guy jumps out there as an employee to try to sell her on one console without, you know, giving a fair consideration of anything, really. And
taking that conversation from weighing up the pros and cons into basic all-out fanboyism sort of typical thing that you see. Because I mean, I make no secret of the fact that I'm not a fan of Xbox 360, but having said that, you know, sitting down and sort of looking at the pros and cons of that against the PS3, I can see for both sides. It just so happens that my preference always has been and will continue to be the product support of Sony, having grown up with Sony. It's not anything against the 360. It has its pros and cons. Yes, it does questionable things, but at the same time, I'm always quick to point out that, you know, when Sony does questionable business practice on the same scale that Microsoft does, I will call them up on it, and I will, you know, make a case why they shouldn't be doing that. And I think too often we find when we go into game stores these days that a lot of the time they try and push one over the other without really asking the consumer what they wanted in the first place. I've seen it even now with the Wii U, for example. You know, there was a lady asking the other day when I went in about the Wii U, why should she get one? She doesn't have a Wii. And but she was intrigued by the Wii U, and the people behind the counter tried to explain to her that she could take all her data off her Wii and put it on her Wii U. And they obviously hadn't listened to what she said, because she quite clearly stated she doesn't have a Wii U in the first place.
Yeah.
So, you know, one does have to question sometimes about these training schemes and such, because certainly with a lot of game shops, it does annoy me that you know, when you sell a product, if you're in a sales position, you should sell a product that's best for the consumer, that fits best for the consumer, as opposed to what fits best with your personal choice.
Yeah.
I think the main problem is that I know a couple of stores near me, employees get bonuses when they sell something. I think that is the main issue. That, for example, you try to sell the Wii U like you mentioned, and you start rambling about all the features. while the customer actually doesn't have anything of that you mentioned. I think that's the main problem. They're too focused on selling stuff instead of helping the consumers.
There's just key things I think that an employee, if he's doing his due diligence, should tell a customer. They should be completely honest about it. One of the things that she struck upon was, I told her, I said, PlayStation Network is free to connect to. I said, whereas Xbox you have to pay yearly for a subscription to Xbox Live. And she's like, oh really? I never had heard any of that anywhere. And the employee, when I mentioned that, it was kind of like one of those things, like it dawned on him, hey, wait a minute, you're you're pitching out a point there that's kind of not, but the reality is she would get home and she would unwrap her Xbox, give it to her kid, who would then go, okay, Mom, now I need your credit card so I can get Xbox Live. And it's problematic for fanboys, that they're out there for both systems, but the reality is they're both good systems, and I think it's striking that places like GameStop, from my experience, can have a strong sway towards. I even saw it in television. If you watch G4 TV and you've ever watched the shows on there. When I initially turned that on, it was all Xbox this, Xbox that, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Well, I stopped watching it actually, but it was like every game was tested on the Xbox. Every game the opinion was from the Xbox. Whenever there was the topic of exclusives, it was like, and Xbox has this, and Xbox has this, and I guess PS3 has that.
I mean, over the last year with Xbox exclusives, I mean, as you say, programs when they cover Xbox exclusives, it's been quite interesting to see the difference between the two platforms, because when I've seen people mention Xbox exclusives outside of your Gears of War, Halo, and your Forza and Fable, a lot of the exclusives tend to be downloadable titles, which sort of tugged at my heart a little bit, because I'm all for promoting the little guy and the indie gamer, but then when you're sort of talking about exclusives, surely the best thing for the indie gamer is to have his game promoted in a better light, if you will, so that so that he can take that to other platforms, make that available to as many people as possible, and then grow as a developer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is something I see Sony do a lot more of than perhaps Microsoft. Certainly a lot of the games that have been releasing across PSN in the last 6 months, have made no secret that they're going to be taking them to other platforms, but Sony have been kind enough to help them with promotion, get the game out, any technical issues and so on.
Well, I remember
if it goes to Steam and
even going a couple years back, Sony's been very good about throwing money at indie developers, and I think that's pretty awesome. And of course, in Japan, there's people. If you actually really truly look at the games that are released in Japan, they support a wide spectrum of game types that, for one, they wouldn't be popular in other countries, and they're just very different. They're very open to experimenting with games, and I think as a company that's pretty great. It speaks very highly of them when they say, okay, we're going to give such and such millions of dollars this year to indie game developers to encourage them to create new game franchises.
I think prime example of that recently would probably be something like Tokyo Jungle, which they did bring to the West, and I'm so glad they did. Although, as you pointed out, they are keen to invest and experiment more. I do wish we did see a lot more of that come over here, and also a lot more of Western developers experimenting more.
Yeah, and those developers are gonna, they're always gonna have even if they become successful and go to other platforms, they're always gonna have a spot in their mind for, hey, I got my break there.
Yeah. And I think that's important to support grassroots as well. Again, which I pointed out that numerous developers have said Microsoft have helped them at grassroots, but it seems to be from Microsoft's side of things, it tends to sort of be more, we will support you at grassroots if we think it's going to sell, whereas Sony are sort of more, we will support you at grassroots even if it doesn't sell, even if it's not successful, because at the end of the day, while this project might not work and it might not sell, you know, that it could spur you on to do greater things. Prime example of that maybe for PlayStation would be David Jaffe. When he left Sony Santa Monica to set up Eat, Sleep, Play, he went on to create Calling All Cars. It didn't sell, and then it turns out, you know, that they still managed, because of the support that they had from Sony, they were still able to then turn out Twisted Metal and work on that and secure the funding. Sony were keen to support Eat, Sleep, Play, and even though David Jaffe has since left Eat, Sleep, Play, they're still working with them to produce games for PSN, which I think is a great story in itself, and you don't tend to hear too many of those on Microsoft's side.
Yeah.
So,
okay,
we're nearly at 2 hours and 10 minutes, so we probably should wrap this up.
Yeah, Gtamen, we already put him to sleep. He's like, we're not talking Grand Theft Auto anymore. I don't care.
No, I'm just listening.
I don't even care.
I only want to say one more thing, that sequels are the safest way to make money, and that's why developers make sequels and not make new IPs. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Topic for another day.
Yeah, I'll just shut up.
Now we're getting to the point where it's, you know, I mean, we've just been on so long that putting everybody to sleep out there. I can already hear 50 quid, and he's like, I'm not watching 2 hours of podcast. He's like,
the chat's been still quite active though, so just before we do go, I just do want to say thank you to all those that are listening in as well. I know we've had a longer podcast, but I think, you know, part and parcel of that as well is that we have fielded questions and sort of tried to cover topics that have been in the chat. So, you know, we're back next week, so similar sort of time, hopefully, probably not as long as podcast, but I would encourage people, you know, to come and listen to us live, and if not, still field questions through Trophies on PSN via PMs and on the YouTube channel as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, feel free to, with that, to recommend guests throughout the week if there's something particular you want to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely recommend.
Anything to do with games. It doesn't have to necessarily be a PS3 console. We'll talk about that. Even movies. You know, I'm a little bit inclined to discuss that because there's some crossover. You know, for example, Walking Dead comes back tonight to AMC.
Yeah. See, I have a problem with that. I can't talk to anybody about Walking Dead because I know you guys in the US are getting the new series. Over here in the UK, we're still a little bit off, so we're going to be behind you. So I'm conscientious that if we talk about it, there is that temptation for spoilers, and I'm like, no, I really do want to see season 3. So it'd be interesting.
Well, maybe there's you can go to the internet and see about getting some downloads over there. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably what I'm going to have to do.
Sons of Anarchy or Get Out.
Yeah.
I knew you'd say that.
Dude, well, that's serious. That's why I love the internet. You can just download everything. Because in my country, they find it funny to broadcast season 1, while in the US, season 5 is almost over.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what that's about, and it's
the Netherlands.
Well, I mean, you know, this we were talking about earlier. You know, we really need to go to more of on demand with the internet, with movies and TV, because you know, it's ridiculous having to wait for a particular time, and that's really why recorders and stuff are so big in the U.S. You know, I have a PVR and I tape everything, so I can fast forward through commercials. I can watch it when I want, and I don't miss anything because that's just it.
I was just going to say, Kryptonite Dragon, I'd be happy if next week, just to give you as a listeners a preview, if I'd be happy to sit and talk regionalisation with you, because I think, you know, that's a very important issue. So, and that would cross over into the TV side of things as well. So, we cover some of that perhaps next week and get a bit more time on going through regionalisation.
And I'd love to hear more about, because here in the U.S. we don't always know a lot of some of the things you've mentioned are going on over there. I wasn't aware of some of those.
You don't want to live in Europe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff originates in the U.S. We clearly know that. Particularly Microsoft is obviously, but how that affects the rest of the world, we're often a little bit, we're not aware of it as much. With our shows and stuff, like how that comes. And then the other thing is, like the PS Store. I've seen a lot of complaints from people from the UK and stuff, like, hey, you guys have that game.
Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
And where the hell is it? Where is it for us? It's English. We speak English. What the hell? Where is our copy of the game? And a lot of times here in America, we're not aware of that.
Still 8 weeks.
So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, we'll cover that next week then, and I'll try and get some notes down on paper as well, just because I've been meaning to sort of sneak onto the American PSN store and just go do like a mini checklist of what's available and what isn't. So yeah, I'll get that done in time, and we'll talk about that more next week.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you for being on, Dante, and thank you, Gtamen. I appreciate your opinion on GTA. We'll have you on again when we learn a little bit more about GTA 5. That's one of the games I'm looking forward to. And hopefully it'll have a nice, robust story. I've seen some videos. It looks like a lot of driving and stuff in the country from what I've seen so far. But hopefully we'll get another, good character and some good storyline and stuff, gameplay. With that.
Don't worry, it's Rockstar Games.
We know it'll be controversial, we just don't know.
I was going to say, we've only got another, 2 or 3 weeks maybe before that happens, so that'll be cool to have you back, mate.
Yes, so thank you both very much, and
likewise.
No worries.
And signing off for our 4th podcast, Trophies on PSN, and hopefully we'll see you next Sunday, same time.